Storygram Network. Hi, podcast listeners. Thanks for joining me today as I head back to the Sierra Foothills region. Both interviews feature winemakers in Amador County, Bill Easton of Domaine de la Terre Rouge and Easton Wines, and his neighbor Paul Sobon of Shenandoah Vineyards, Sobon Estate, and his boutique brand, Paul J. Wines. So, let's hit the road.
So if you were to go to New York City when all the restaurants are open and go to a place like 11 Madison Park or Danielle, you'll see maybe a 99 Syrah from us on the wine list there.
10 Aught's it's probably the most popular tasting room red that we do.
Really?
It's crazy because it's that big, juicy, just dark as night sort of wine that just has so much flavor. And it's an interesting wine that people don't know much about.
Just before winter weather fell upon us in Northern California, and just hours after tasting rooms were shut down with the year's second stay-at-home order, my wife Meredith and I followed through with our plans to travel over to Amador County for these interviews on Friday, December 11th. The tasting rooms were open for sales and pickup, and thankfully both Bill and Paul were happy to meet with us. I'll start with Bill, and as you'll hear, there's a bit of reverb on Bill's mic, which was on a mic stand, and I was 6 feet away holding my microphone. The wine regions of Sierra Foothills have made great strides in the last 20 to 30 years. They are giving Napa and Sonoma counties a run for their money. Literally, because the quality is comparable, yet at lower prices. What inspired me to choose Bill was the fact that Wine and Spirits magazine had chosen him yet again as a top 100 winery of the world. While setting up the interview, I also discovered he had recently picked up a 100-point score for his 2016 Domaine de la Terre Rouge Syrah Ascent from Wine Enthusiast. That's certainly reason enough to travel to Amador. Another thing about Bill I wanted to cover is the fact that he's a founding member of the Rhone Rangers and pioneered the growing of Rhone varieties in the Sierra Foothills.
I did, yeah. I was one of the pioneers. There was another gentleman actually that was up here working with Rhone varieties before me in El Dorado County. His name was John McCready. But in Amador County, yeah, I'm the guy. And then generally the Sierra Foothills. And I think we've had probably the most success with Rhone varieties of anybody who's worked with those varieties. Definitely in the Sierra Foothills, but we're definitely one of the most successful wineries in California with those varieties.
So when you decided to get into that, did you help expand on the planting of the varieties?
We did. We grafted over some existing vineyards to Rhone varieties so to get going, starting making wine. There was a few other people that had taken extension classes at UC Davis who was promoting Rhone varieties at the time, Syrah in the early 80s and stuff, because they'd gotten a bunch of new plant material in the late 60s and early 70s from different places around the world of Rhone varietals. So there was a general interest in these varieties for California because of our Mediterranean climate. And you end up giving talks at Foothill Grape Day or at a state presentation or something, and people come up to you afterwards and say, hey, I just bought 20 acres here and I'd like to grow some grapes for you. So then we've developed relationships. I did a lot of consulting then, and some of the people that we consulted planting vineyards with, we then contracted back the whole crop. So we've had ongoing relationships with many people for 20 to 30 years because of these initial contacts.
Yeah. Must have taken you a little while, though, to get going.
It does. A farming business, you've got to be patient. And, it's funny, once you get into it, you realize how short the year is because you get really tuned into the seasonal cycles. And before you know it, you finish one harvest, but another one's upon you again. When you're 18, it seems like it takes forever for a year to go by. But, if you're 60, it goes by pretty fast.
It sure does. And this region is ideal for Rhone varieties. It's very similar to some of the soil and the gravel in the Côte de Rhône in France.
It is. And that's what attracted us here. I grew up in Sacramento, so my parents used to drag me up here when I was just a little kid. There was only one winery back then, but we'd have outings, and they drank wine from this winery. And then I, spent a lot of time in the Sierra Nevada backpacking, hiking. So I'm conversant with the geography and the geology of the Sierras. And this region has a lot of granitic-based soils and a lot of volcanic-based soils, which is just like the Northern Rhone.
Between his Amador County, Terre, Rouge, and Easton brands, he makes over 30 different wines, but in small quantities. Many are just 1 to 500 cases.
A lot of it is very small production wine.
My first thought is, how do you keep track of all those when...
Well, you just, you're organized generally when you pick these vineyards and you ferment the wine, and then we keep each lot separately. So it's easy to track. It's easier than it seems. What a lot of people who aren't in the wine business don't realize is that all grapes don't ripen at the same time, even the same grape varieties. So we could have 10 different lots of Zinfandel, but they could ripen from the early part of September to the latter part of October. So there's a whole range of time.
Thankfully.
So all this stuff doesn't happen at one time. Otherwise, we'd be in big trouble.
Right. So you have your Terre Rouge brand,
which is the whole Rhone portfolio,
right?
Which means red earth, and it's an homage to the terroir here, which has a little iron oxide in it, so there's kind of a red tinge to the soil. And then Easton is my last name, and we decided to use it for basically our old vine Zinfandel program and some of the other ancillary traditional California varieties that we do, like Sauvignon Blanc, Barbera, Cabernet Sauvignon.
Especially those that grow well here in Amador.
And the Sierra Foothills. We actually source fruit from four counties. So Placer, El Dorado, Amador, and Calaveras. Yeah.
Great. Well, while I'm thinking about it, congratulations on once again being a Wine and Spirits Top 100 Winery of the World, just announced in the last few months, and also a 100-point score on your Syrah, The Ascent from Wine Enthusiast.
Yeah. And Jim Gordon is the editor who is responsible for the Sierra Foothill region as well as a few other regions. But when they pick a 100-point wine, they actually taste collaboratively and get their writers to taste the wines from other regions.
I would imagine, yeah.
Yeah, and he wrote a really thoughtful article too, What Makes a 100-Point Wine, which is available online at the Wine Enthusiast site. It came out in their February issue. And I thought that was a great article, almost as great as getting the 100 points, was just what goes into a 100-point wine.
Sure.
But it's a really nice kudo, and particularly kind of when you're in the golden years of your career to kind of get that kind of recognition. And the wine and spirits thing is fantastic. That's the third time for us, so we've gotten a top 100 winery. What's great about it too, it's not limited just to California wineries. It's wineries in the world.
I always point that out when I say the top 100 winery, because it's not just the U.S., it is the entire world.
Yeah, so that I love that award. That's fantastic. And what's great about that is, all the people who work for us really feel good about that one too, because that is not just a winemaking thing so much as the winery and what we do, the whole winery. So. And
I love the annual event they have in San Francisco, and certainly disappointed that we missed it this year.
Yeah, that's a great event.
I would have seen you there, maybe.
Yeah. Hopefully next year.
Oh yes, yeah, hopefully. On your website, you have one page specifically for your Terre Rouge Ascent Syrahs, and I can see it makes sense because so many of your Syrahs have wonderful scores going back to like 2000. So you've been scoring quite well with that particular Syrah.
Yeah, actually, even some of them going back further. And we've had kind of a consistent quality thing going here, and people are catching on to it. It takes a while. We're kind of in an offbeat area. Napa gets a lot of attention because it's a day trip from San Francisco, but we're only another extra hour further, so hopefully more people come up here. But definitely our visits have increased in the last 20 years.
He's Bill Easton of Terre, Rouge Wines and Easton Wines. He said they make about 20,000 cases between the two brands and sell across the U.S., Canada, Japan, and other countries. On his website, terrerouge.com, he has a page dedicated to his Ascent Syrah wines. The vineyard designation is Sierra Foothills, which means they're blends of Syrah from several vineyards. And picking up a 100-point score for his 2016 Ascent indicates that he has that brand dialed in.
Ascent is usually made up of 4 or 5 different vineyard sites that we work with. They change every year. We age that wine in a special extended aged barrel program, and not only is the wine in barrel a little longer, the staves in the cooperage are aged outside before they're made into barrels longer, so the oak has a more subtle interface with the wine. And then we release the wine a little later. So it's a luxury tête de cuvée, and it's a wine I build to be really. You really shouldn't start drinking that wine for about 10 years from the vintage, and it's made that way. If you want to drink something at 5 years from the vintage, you should buy one of our wines that costs half that price.
Yeah. It's a pricier one on your list.
It's our most expensive wine. It's $100 a bottle. But you can buy our other Syrahs for $40, $45 a bottle, and those are fantastic. You can, you go to a restaurant, you're getting a $100 bottle of wine that's probably a $50 bottle of wine retail. You can buy a $100 bottle of wine and treat yourself maybe on a birthday night or a special occasion to something nicer. So,
yeah. I wanted to highlight one of your wines, the 2003 Terre Rouge Syrah from the Sentinel Oak Vineyard in Shenandoah Valley here. What's interesting about this wine is you just released that earlier this year to your wine club.
Right.
Now it's available to the public, but a 2003. So tell me what's so special about that vineyard.
Well, Sentinel Oak is the original Syrah vineyard that we started working with. It's owned by a gentleman named Paul DiStefano, and he was one of the guys I was talking about earlier who'd taken a UC Davis viticultural extension class, and the professor that he had there suggested to him, he just purchased some property here, that he plant Syrah. So we were his first customer, and we have a block in the vineyard called the Pyramid Block. He has other blocks as well, and often we buy some of that fruit as well, but we've always been the sole buyer of the Pyramid fruit, which this 2003 Syrah is from. And what makes it unique is its mother clone Syrah that came into California in the late 60s. There were 8 selections that came from Hermitage, Chapoutier via Australia. So actually they went to Australia a long time ago, 1840s, and they went to Best's, and then they were brought to California in the late 60s. And Paul got cuttings from the UC Davis nursery and planted them ohm-rooted. So this vineyard is planted without rootstock, and it's on decomposed granite.
That's crazy.
It's a south-facing slope at about 1,700 feet. So the wine has great minerality, great fruit, but it also has very lively acidity. It's a very pure expression of Syrah, has great longevity. So we hold back a pallet or two of some of these wines and then bring them out at a later date. So this wine was released a long time ago, but we brought this other pallet that we had out to sell because we think the wine is gorgeous right now.
That's great.
Yeah.
So you released it in like 05 or 6.
Right. And so we have some older vintages of things. We have a cellar reserve program that we offer to restaurants and fine retail stores across the country. So if you were to go to New York City when all the restaurants are open and go to a place like 11 Madison Park or Danielle, you'll see maybe a 99 Syrah from us on the wine list there. And that's sold to our New York distributor from our cellar to sell to these restaurants so they can have some older, interesting wines on their wine list. So,
well, if any of my listeners end up there, I want them to say, I heard Bill on the radio, on the podcast.
All right, cool.
Yeah,
cool.
Talking about this wine.
All right.
You know, that 03, though, it's $65, but that's not too rich a price for a wine of that caliber.
No, I think it's a very fair price, and the wine is gorgeous. Yeah.
Another one that caught my eye, and I think you mentioned it briefly earlier, was your 2019 Terre Rouge Vin Gris d'Amador.
Right, yeah. So
which is part Grenache and Mourvedre, red wines, and then you also have Roussanne, Grenache Blanc, and Viognier in that as well.
That's right. So we've been making rosé since the late 1980s, and I was a huge fan of dry French rosé, particularly from Provence. And actually, my first few vintages of rosé weren't from Rhone varieties because there really weren't enough Rhone varieties available up here to make rosé from. So any Rhone varieties we had, we were making red wine from. So I actually made a dry rosé from Zinfandel, actually, from the old vineyard in Fiddletown. And the reason we called it Vin Gris, which simply means gray wine, it's not black wine, it's not white wine, it's gray wine, Vin Gris, was in the late 1980s, people thought of rosé as this kind of sweet thing. And we wanted to draw a distinction for the consumer that this was a different product. And so now we've morphed it into a Rhone-style rosé, and we've just kept the name Vin Gris just because that's it's our tradition. Yeah. And that wine just got 92 out of 100 points. Yeah.
You don't see the red and whites blended too often. I've had a few of them over the years, but it's kind of fun to see that they do mix well. You get the right blend and percentages.
Yeah. And rosé, is a great wine. People think of it as a summer wine or spring wine, but really, it's great aperitif wine any time of year, particularly over the holidays. Some people call it the red wine drinker's white wine.
Sure, right, yeah. A couple of years ago, I was interviewing Joshua Green of Wine and Spirits, the senior editor there, and I noticed that the winning top 100 wineries from the year before had changed considerably to the present year. And I said, I noticed a lot of the regulars didn't come back this year. And so did you change your criteria a little bit? And he said they're definitely now focusing more on those who are farming sustainably.
Right. Which,
because of the way you farm here, has made you still very appealing to them because you are sustainable here, and you're also 90% of your electricity for the winery and tasting room is from solar power.
Yeah, we're really a green winery. Jane and I, my wife and partner in the business, are really people who, have kind of been aware of kind of the environmental deterioration of the planet for a long time. So when we put our footprint on things, we try to do it in the lightest way as possible. And as you mentioned, our winery's been 90% solar powered since 2004, so we're one of the early instigators of that. And as far as our vineyards go, we're totally green, we're totally organic, so we don't use any herbicides, we don't use any commercial fertilizers. I'll be planting a plow down mix cover crop before the rains later today. It's a totally sustainable organic operation. So,
excellent.
Yeah.
You say your goal is to make the finest wines possible that can be placed on a table with the best wines of the world, and I think you've proven that.
Yeah, that was my goal, 25 years ago, and it's great to have a mission statement like that, but actually to have it happen is very satisfying.
Yeah, it's Wine and Spirits magazine proved that, and I'm sure many other magazines as well. So congratulations.
Thank you.
Well, I'm thinking about it. Why don't you go ahead and sell us on the Rhone Rangers? Tell us about your organization and why it's such an important cause.
Rhone Rangers is an organization of wineries that obviously promote Rhone varieties, and it's a great organization of wineries all throughout not only California, but the United States. So there's wineries from Oregon, Washington, Arizona.
Virginia?
Virginia, yeah. Horton from Virginia, I know, yeah. And it's a wonderful organization, and We usually do some events during the year, a couple of tasting events, and we have an educational fund that we raise money for students to get into viticulture and to enology. So it's a trade organization that promotes Rhone varieties in California, and I think does a great job of it.
Yeah. Anything else you'd like to add, Bill?
No, thanks for coming up to Amador and talking about the region, and hope to see you back up here again soon.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you what, when I was going through your wine list on your website, I mean, I could spend hundreds of dollars in here easily. So I'm going to have to go out and get my wife and buy some things while we're here.
Great.
And thanks for sharing your Zinster. This is very tasty, your carbonic maceration Zinfandel.
Thank you. It's perfect for just a little sip in the afternoon.
Yes, the Zinster was nice to sip while we chatted. The talented Bill Easton of Domaine de la Terre Rouge, or you can just call it Terre Rouge, and Easton Wines. Find out more about them at terrerougewines.com. I'll pause here in case you need to take a break, and I'll return with Paul Sobon on the Wine Road. We're back. Thanks for sticking around for part 2. I'm Jeff Davis. Now we're going to travel on the Wine Road, about 2 minutes down the road from Terre Rouge to talk with Paul Sobon. Paul was kind enough to invite my wife and me to his home. This was early afternoon on the day it rained that weekend, and winter felt like it was finally kicking in. But we were ahead of the storm and sat vineyard and poolside with Paul at a safe distance in his backyard. The history of Shenandoah Vineyards, then Sobon Estate, starts with Paul's father, Leon. His story is one that has been replicated numerous times in the wine industry since the late 60s, more so in the last 20 to 30 years. He was successful in another vocation, in this case working at the Lockheed Research Lab in Los Altos, but made wine as a hobby. Inspired by his passion, he'd pack up the kids and his wife Shirley in the station wagon and drive around various California wine regions. And one day he decided to buy a ranch in Plymouth and turn his hobby into a new business, which was a leap of faith.
It really is. It's ballsy. It's crazy. I mean, he met my mom in the Bay Area. He was from Lackawanna, New York, grew up outside of Buffalo and went to school in Alfred, New York, and got his degree in ceramic engineering. My mom was an RN working and got her license in Canada. But back in the late 50s, California was looking for nurses, looking for scientists, looking for people that could help the state grow and have the Silicon Valley become what it became. And so they moved out there, started having kids, and got married, and they met out here in Palo Alto. And I think he had a great job. He worked at Hewlett-Packard. He worked at Stanford Research Institute. He worked at Lockheed, was his last place. But
wow.
Yeah, he did have a good job, but I think he was just a little bit bored of the big corporate life, and he was just very passionate about his hobbies, and luckily it was winemaking that stuck with him.
Right. And you need that passion to make that work, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, you I'm sure you've interviewed a million guys or women that have the passion about what they do. Especially in the wine world, it's a very passionate thing to get into.
Absolutely,
I describe my job as the best job in the world. I mean, you're kind of nobody's unhappy. It's not like going to the dentist. Nobody's unhappy to see you, especially because you usually have a bottle or two of wine with you, or
right.
you're going to tell them about some new release that you have or something that just happened in this vintage you're super excited about. And I think a lot of people have that really sort of primal connection to the earth, right?
Mm-hmm.
Especially when you can drink it.
Right. And I was going to ask about how your mother Shirley felt about the move. Was she supportive of what your dad was thinking about doing?
Not a lot of people would describe my mom as a saint, because she's kind of got that business, a little bit harder edge to her. But she's amazing. The fact that she was willing to move 6 kids, and the 2 of them, and literally go from a very middle-class lifestyle to the unknown. I mean, there was no nest egg of millions and millions of dollars that we were going to build this huge, beautiful spot. So it was literally the garage and buying used equipment and just hoping for the best. I mean, when we got started up here, she ended up not nursing for about 15 years, so she had to re-get her license, so there was some income.
But she went back to it, though.
She went back to it.
Good for her.
So.
Well, and that's the other thing I wanted to ask you about, because when you decide to move up and start a winery, that takes years. He even planted the vineyard, right? And you bought the old...
Well, it was an old Steiner ranch, so there was no grapes, no winery on there at all. So this was what we turned into Shenandoah Vineyards in 1977. So we moved up here in August of 77, I think either the first few days of August or the last few days of July, and the station wagon, the Vista Cruiser, and loaded up with a U-Haul trailer and a bunch of trips and moved everything up here, and literally we're making wine within a couple of weeks. So there was nothing. There was no insulation in the garage. There was no not proper plumbing or electrical. So
he just purchased grapes then to make the first vintage?
If some of your listeners will possibly remember the drought of 74, 75, 76, 77, it was the worst drought probably in the last 50 years. So there was a lot of farmers that had no grapes. So it was a really bad year to try to get grapes, but just the kindness of people's hearts would sell us a couple of tons of this or a couple of tons of that just to get us started. Because we were sort of we were something that hadn't been happening in Amador County for a while, because the D'Agostini's winery 1856 is what we own now as Sobon Estate. And then basically Story and Montevina were up here in the early 71, 72, but that was sort of it.
Right. Yeah. So he was kind of a pioneer in this area.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah.
He's Paul Sobon of Sobon Estate. I was curious about what kind of varietals his father bottled that first year with Shenandoah Vineyards, since they had no vineyards themselves.
We made a couple of different Zinfandels from Frank Del Porto, was one grower up here. And then the Twin Rivers Ranch, which now is owned by Rombauer, had planted some grapes in the late 60s, and we were able to get a couple of tons from there. And we got a Pinot Blanc from Livermore and a Chenin Blanc from El Dorado County. So those, and a little bit of Cabernet from a guy named Baldinelli, which is where Bill Easton gets some of his Cabernet for his wine. So Bill's on the Baldinelli, the old Baldinelli property there is where his winery is. And so those are the first 5 wines. And of course, the whites were done so we would have some income a little sooner. Sure. So we're probably talking about less than 100 cases of each of those. So, and back then, my father made very, very tannic, very sort of lean, very Bordeaux style, more European style red wine.
How old were you at that time?
I was 15.
Okay.
So 15 and a half, and I was between freshman and sophomore year in high school. And, you go from Los Altos High, which is a very upper middle class part of this country, and 2,600, 2,300 students, and my graduating class in 1980 was 91. So a really small school, but I played football and was in all kinds of sports. So before school even started, I knew probably a third of the students that went to Amador High.
That's funny.
So.
Well, judging by how you look and how you're dressed, it looks like you adapted to the country lifestyle pretty easily. I know it's been many years, but...
Yeah.
Did you have the feeling fairly quickly that this is what you wanted to do as well? You wanted to follow in his footsteps, or were you kind of on the fence about what
No, I had no idea. In 77, I was just interested in girls and partying and playing football, like most 16-year-olds. And
well, owning a winery would lead to that pretty easily, though, pretty well.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. It's really interesting because...
You make a lot of friends and girlfriends.
Well, you do have a little bit better access to wine. But, it wasn't until... I graduated from high school. I went to junior college for a semester, and then I went to travel to Europe for 8 months, and then junior college for another semester, and then I went to Australia. I had some connections down there to work in the wine industry in 1983, the 83 vintage in Australia. And by the time I came back from that, I was like, okay, this is what I want to do.
Well, I was going to say, you really got to jump on becoming a future winemaker because you did so much traveling right away. And so I thought maybe that was because you decided that you did want to, but it sounds like you were still not really quite sure.
Well, I guess it was probably a little bit before that, post right after high school. In high school, you're mostly drinking beer and whatever else you can get your hands on, but I just started to develop a flavor for red wine and really started to enjoy it and couldn't wait to get to Europe with some of my family's connections that we had met people. Harry Waugh was a very famous London wine broker that had connections in Bordeaux and Portugal and parts of Spain. And so we got to do some incredible tours of some amazing facilities and really got to appreciate some really interesting different styles of wine.
Great.
So,
yeah. Really good education.
It really is. It really is.
But you went to UC Davis too.
I did just some extension classes and was never enrolled full-time at UC Davis. So extension classes for probably 10 years to learn more about chemistry and wine appreciation. Most of my experience is working for other people. And my father and Scott Harvey. I worked for Scott Harvey for a few years when Scott's not that much older than I am, but he's probably 5 years older than I am. But he, kind of was into that already. So,
and he's just
he's just right up the road. Right,
Yeah.
He was in Napa for a long time, and then he. The listeners can probably hear the dogs going crazy in the back here.
Your labs are having some fun running around. As I mentioned earlier, Paul and I were in his backyard, and his 2 yellow Labradors were keeping themselves busy. He's the current head winemaker, although he does have help these days. And I asked, when did he finally take over the winemaking responsibility from his father?
So my dad turned 70. My dad's 86 now, and 86 or 87, I frankly can't remember. And when he turned 70, he pretty much sort of said, I'm done. I'm walking away. And probably for 10 years before that, I started taking over. So for the last 25 years, I've sort of been in charge, and now I'm pretty much in charge of my family's of the winemaking, at least the final decisions. We have a winemaker, Joe Coughlin, which is great. And we've got I'm sort of the vineyard manager, and I'm in charge of all the sales outside the tasting room. So all the distributors, my brother-in-law, who you met a little while ago, Tom, does our Northern California and West Coast sales. So he reports to me. And so, I'm doing a million things and then starting this new place with my daughter. So lots to do.
And you have other family members involved.
I do, yeah. So my brother-in-law, Tom, my brother, Robert, sort of handles the business side of things, sort of direct-to-consumer stuff. He's got a couple sons working for him, one full-time, one part-time. Who else? My younger sister, Elaine, works 2 to 3 days a week in the office, just helping out wherever she can.
Great. Talking about your father, I saw that it said he contributes his winemaker experience with every vintage. So is that past now? Has he done overseeing what's going on?
It's interesting. Last year was the last year that I got him to go sample vineyards, just to see where we are with sugars. But he doesn't like to get on a 4x4 or any sort of vehicle to go sample vineyards. He wants to walk, and so his walking isn't as vibrant and robust as it used to be.
Right.
So this year he didn't sample really any vineyards, and he's not too interested in getting involved, other than telling me 6 months later, wow, that Pinot was really good. Where'd you get those grapes from? Or my God, I can't believe the Chardonnay was so good. Or the Tannat, I never thought I liked Tannat. So that's sort of
those are good things to hear.
Yeah, it's mostly just encouragement. He's really amazing that way.
So we're talking about Shenandoah Vineyards up to this point. I thought it was interesting how for your parents' 30th wedding anniversary, they bought each other a second winery, and that became Sobon Estate.
Right. So that was started out as the Eulinger Winery in 1856. It's the oldest.
Wow.
It's the oldest continuously operating winery in California, and it never stopped operating. There's a few in the Napa Sonoma area that claim to be older, but Krug was, I think, 58, 59.
Krug was not continuous.
Yeah, it was not continuous.
I think Gunlock Bundschuh is the one that's been the one that can say that we're the longest running, especially family winery.
Right, but Bundschuh wasn't until 57 or 58.
Right, a little bit later.
Right, and then was it Patchett that was about 55, but he didn't actually start a winery until 57, I think it was. So it's really kind of interesting. And a lot of people sort of overlook the foothills as an area. I mean, we're not the oldest winery in the state by far. I mean, there's older wineries that don't exist anymore in San Diego and in Los Angeles County and
outside
Riverside
of LA,
County.
yeah.
But sort of, if you think about where all the bodies were in 1849, I think we all remember our California history, what happened in 1849 when they discovered gold. Amador County probably was producing more wine in 1870 than they were now, just because there was 100 little wineries and there was 100 little stills and breweries operating.
And tens of thousands of people.
And tens of thousands of thirsty people up here. So, yeah.
Some who were making money, many who weren't.
Exactly.
But, so each estate has their own vineyards, is that correct? Or do you source from the one large 225?
Well, so we have
125?
5 different vineyard sites. So we have Sobon Estate, which was the old DeAugustini Eulinger winery, is 85 acres. and mostly Zinfandel over there. There's a little bit of Cab, a little bit of Syrah, some of the Primitivo clone, a little bit of Petit Syrah, and a little bit of Roussan. Oh, a little bit of Malbec also. And then Shenandoah Vineyards is about 45 acres. Cab Viognier, Cab Franc, quite a few others, some of the Muscats. The Jackson Valley is 75 acres, and that's a little bit closer to Lodi appellation. It's still in Amador County. Zin, Petit, Tannat, some of the a little bit warmer down there.
Yeah.
Small little Fiddletown. Vineyard of Zin, it's 12 acres, and then the little vineyard here in my backyard, which is a couple acres of Zin. So, yeah, and so we buy this year we bought almost no grapes. We had a phenomenal harvest, phenomenal vintage, really beautiful wines and nice crops and just perfect balance of amount of fruit. And even though it was smoky and hazy up here for 6 weeks,
You got some of that too, huh?
Didn't really have any smoke taint issues.
Thank goodness.
Up here. Yeah, got lucky there.
Yeah, because it was supposed to be a great year in Napa and Sonoma County too, but it didn't work out that way.
We all know what happened there.
Yeah, boy. Yeah, but some interesting varieties, and I was looking at the website between the two estates, Sobon and Shenandoah. There's not a real differential there between the two. You both have a great amount of different varieties that you're bottling.
And Sobon's a little bit higher end stuff, and Shenandoah's a little bit. None of our wines are expensive. Even our most expensive wine on either list is $28 a bottle, and for us it seems like a lot. It doesn't seem like a lot anymore, but Shenandoah is probably maxed out as at $24, $22 a bottle. We're sort of more Italian stuff with a little bit of Sangiovese over at Shenandoah, some Vermentino. Sobon has some of the Rhone varieties, Syrah and Viognier, Roussan, and of course both have Zin.
But good to see the Malbec and the Tannat, like you're mentioning, and those are fun varieties.
Yeah, Tannat's one of our, I think it's probably the most popular tasting room red that we do.
Really?
Yeah, it's
That's
really
good to hear.
It's crazy because it's that big, juicy, just dark as night sort of wine that just has so much flavor, and people just can't quite believe it. And it's an interesting wine that people don't know much about. Yeah. So people are a little bit more interested in learning something about it, not just another Zin or another Cab or another Pinot. It's something. What's Tannat? Well, tell me about that. Why is it like that? So yeah, pretty fun.
From what I hear, you have to be careful with that because the tannins just want to run wild on that wine, and you really have to control the tannic element.
So we grow that down in Jackson Valley, which is a little warmer down there, and I think that has to be overripe grapes to make decent wine. And then we water it back a little bit to get the alcohols under control. Yeah. Because if not, you're going to end up with this. Up here, we'd probably only get it to 23 or 24 sugar. Even though the elevation change is maybe 1,000 feet, it's quite a bit warmer down there. Mm-hmm. And so it really needs that heat to really, really, really get ripe. We've looked at some Tannats from other growers or other wineries, and you just kind of go, didn't get that one ripe enough, did you? Because it can be just enamel destroying. It makes Petit Syrah look like a gentle wine.
Yeah, especially the cold climate one.
Yeah.
But boy, you're producing quite a bit of wine, 40,000 cases per year, and that's just with Sobon, and then like 25,000 with Shenandoah?
Yeah, the total is about 50,000, so the split is probably 35 Sobon and the rest Shenandoah. Mm-hmm. And then we also do the production for Paul J up there too, and that's about a 3,500 cases.
That's sizable.
Yeah, it's not bad for year 3, so we're super happy about that.
Right.
And we do the most popular wine we do here is a Chardonnay, and it's a Chardonnay we buy from, it's basically wine that we have made for us, and the grapes are from Central Coast and from Clarksburg. So it's a super buttery, over-the-top Chardonnay that we all know how people like that. People talk like they don't like big woody wines, but that's what they like.
Oh, yeah, they'll say it, but it's still the top-selling varietal in the U.S.
Yeah.
Talking about the price, I know Total Wine and Spirits carries the Sobon Estate, at least, and you must be one of the lower-priced wines.
It's interesting. So, I think with Total Wine, they're not really a discount for brands like ours. It's not really a discount place, right? So you'll find their wines there the same we would sell in the tasting room, but another grocery store might buy a big chunk of our wines, a couple, 300-400 cases at a time, and the distributor that we sell to gives them a discount, and they choose only to, make 10 or 12, 14% markup. So all of a sudden you'll see the wine in the tasting room and $18, and you'll see it at a local market or a chain market for $14, and you go, well, we can't really do anything about that.
Yeah, you hear back from those people who notice that, don't you?
It's interesting. You're not as much as you used to, frankly, because people kind of get it. They understand that some stores just choose not to make a markup. So, and that's why we try to keep our wines out of Costco. It's like we don't need to be there. Costco's a great store. They're a great wine retailer, but it would be the lowest common denominator. All of a sudden, our $20 wine would now be a $14 bottle of wine, and we need to not do that. So.
Yeah. Well, I saw at Total Wine, I think they had some for like $14.95, $16.95. So for Total Wine and more, that's a low price.
Yeah, it is. It is. So we have our old vines in that they probably sell for $13.99 or $14.99, and that's sort of it's a wine that we do a large volume. This year we didn't buy any of the grapes, but other years we've been able to buy grapes, and we've been able to buy them at a reasonable price, and just trying to get wine out there that, we do have our $22 to $30 wines, and but we love to find a good bargain that you can buy for less than $15. I think we all like that, and we don't mind being that person for a percentage of our what we do. So
he is yet another laid-back, easy-to-talk with winemaker, the kind that makes working on this show so enjoyable for me. Paul Sobon of Shenandoah Vineyards and Sobon Estate. But wait, there's more. I was asking Paul about what variety he enjoys working with the most. He'll answer that question after he offers this detail about his time in the vineyards.
I spend from April 1st through harvest at least 1 to 2 days a week in every vineyard on my mountain bike, looking at every block. I don't get in a motorcycle. I don't get in a side-by-side. I get on my mountain bike. Nice. I get exercise. It takes me 2 6-hour days to ride every block of all of our vineyards, just to see what's going on. I love it's basically footprints, and I'll call them tire prints in the vineyards that basically make great wine. It's not driving through it at 40 miles an hour in a pickup truck or just treating it the same every year. I think it's the old adage, you can't make great wine without great grapes. So if we're able to do a little bit more thinning to make the crop a little bit more even in the Zinfandel, that's what we'll do. I think Zin, yes, can be a hard grape to grow, but I think the way we're doing it up here is not as difficult because we're not trying to get the maximum crop. We're just trying to get really good quality. We have to get a crop, of course, but we've got to get good quality. I think wines that I really love to make are things like Petit Syrahs and Tannats, because they're so much fun from when you pick them, and the smell in the bins before they're even crushed, and when they start to ferment, they just have the most amazing intensity to them, and you just can tell it's going to be something special. It's going to be something special, but then again, I had the privilege of buying some Oak Knoll Cabernet in 2018, and made my first Napa Cab that we're going to release under the Paul J label, and it's just this amazing wine. And you kind of I was never really. I get Napa Cab. It's like one of the most amazing wines in the world. It's incredible, but I never got why you would spend so much money on grapes and until you see that in the fermenter and smell it and watch it and play with it and watch it and live and breathe. And we're talking a couple of tons, so a very small batch for me, but really exciting.
It's only a few $100,000.
Yeah.
No, I exaggerate.
Yeah, I got a pretty good deal. I think I paid $2,500 a ton.
But you understand it now, though, huh?
It's wild. It's really wild. We're used to yields up here of our Zins from 150 to 170 gallons per ton, and I think after we pressed out the cab, I was pretty excited, and I asked my winemaker, I said, well, how many barrels? And he said, well, 4. I'm like, what? That's only 120 gallons. He says, yeah, and that was squeezing them, as far as they should be. It's like, well, and then I kind of started talking to some of my friends at Napa, and they're like, oh yeah, that's our yield, 120, 125. So that adds to the cost of it. So.
Well, good stories, though. I liked hearing what you're saying about the Petit Syrah and the Tannat. That's great. Yeah,
those are fun. They're just fun. And the Sazao, Tintacal, some of the Portuguese varieties, you think somebody's cooking tomato sauce in the cellar. It's got that ragu, kind of oregano and tomato aroma when those grapes are fermenting. And I think that's what's really still super fun about harvest is that, when I'm on my mountain bike and I'm testing, I'm constantly tasting and chewing up seeds and just going, wow. And even now you go through the vineyards and you can still find grapes that are still intact out there, even after the first freeze. Mm-hmm. I got myself a handful of Vermentino that was all raisin but still had some moisture left in them, and I was like, wow, that's amazing.
I can't tell people enough that if they have not been up here yet to Sierra Foothills and any of these regions along here, it's just such a great place to see down-home people and taste wonderful wine, world-class wines at not world-class prices.
Yeah, it's really great. It's amazing. Amador's unique. The Shenandoah Valley of Amador is really a very concentrated, beautiful area. But, last weekend my girlfriend and I got over to Apple Hill, which is where some really great wineries, Boger and Starfield, and a few others that Delfino that I'd never heard of before. Got a chance to taste some wines over there, and it's fantastic. And there's Skinner up in Fairplay, and there's some great El Dorado, Calaveras. I know those three counties the best, but it's really a unique area, and there's a good chance you're going to meet ownership when you go in, or the daughter or the son of the owners, or people that really have a vested interest in making you feel welcome and giving you a little bit different experience.
Well, thanks for your time, Paul.
Oh, it's been great.
I know
Thanks,
you're
Jeff.
a sort of busy guy, but
yeah, there's always time. I think it's what'd you do today, and I have no idea. I'm exhausted, I'm tired, and I never stop, but I'm not sure what I did today, so that's not such a bad thing.
Yeah, your dogs are kind of similar,
Yeah, exactly.
They keep very active, and then now they're just chilling out. Great guy, Paul Sobon. His family's Sobon Wine Company, including his Paul J. Wines, is impressive. And Paul is about as relaxed as a head honcho can be. The tasting rooms are closed for tastings, but sales and pickups are available at Shenandoah Vineyards. Visit SobonWine.com, that's SOBON, wine.com, and take a look at the wines of Shenandoah Vineyards and Sobon Estate. As I mentioned earlier, as of January 14th or so, outdoor tastings are now available in Amador and El Dorado counties, and possibly other wine regions in the Sierra Foothills. No matter where you'd like to go, check out the winery's websites for details. Happy wine tasting and happy, better New Year. Find more interviews at onthewineroad.com, and I'm on Instagram at jdwineroad. Stay safe, stay happy, and I'll talk with you soon on the Wine Road. I'm Jeff Davis.
Hosting for this podcast is generously provided by Transistor at transistor.fm.